The beam of the searchlight cut through the oppressive darkness of the Ural Mountains, a frail, wavering spear of illumination against a vast, uncaring wilderness. It was not a living soul that it found, but the grim silhouette of a ravaged tent. The canvas was slashed open from the inside, as if clawed by frantic hands, gaping wide to the -30°C abyss. Around it, the snow was trampled by a chaos of footprints, some barefoot, others clad only in socks, all leading away from the relative safety of the shelter and down the slope towards the dense, dark line of the Siberian pine forest. There was no sound, no cry for help, only the moaning wind and the chilling, absolute silence that had swallowed 9 young lives on the slope the indigenous Mansi people called Katabatic, the mountain of the dead. Inside the tent, a scene of arrested life was frozen in time. 9 rucksacks, neatly packed. 9 pairs of boots, lined up with mundane orderliness. Watches ticked on silent wrists, their hands forever circling the moment of catastrophe. Canned food, journals, and worn coats lay abandoned, telling a story of a departure so swift and so desperate that the most fundamental instincts of survival, to seek shelter, to put on shoes, to protect oneself from the cold, were utterly discarded. It was a tableau that defied all logic, a puzzle box of panic sealed in ice. The searchers, seasoned mountaineers themselves, felt a deep, primal dread. This was not a simple accident, but a frantic, terrified exodus from sanctuary into a frozen hell. Days would pass before the full, horrifying picture would be assembled, a trail of tragedy leading from the shredded tent. The first 2 bodies were found at the tree-line, barefoot and clad only in their underwear, huddled under a tall cedar tree as if seeking its scant protection. A short distance away, a small, sad fire had been built, its embers long cold. Further on, 3 more bodies were discovered, frozen in postures that spoke of a determined, collective effort to return to the tent, their bodies pointing back up the slope towards the home they would never reach. But the final, most gruesome discoveries were yet to come, buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine, their bodies telling a story of injuries so bizarre and violent they would ignite decades of speculation and fear. To understand the end, one must return to the beginning, to the bustling halls of the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk in the winter of 1959. Here, a group of 10 experienced ski hikers, led by the ambitious and determined Igor Dyatlov, were preparing for an expedition. These were not novices, they were students and graduates of radio engineering, physically fit, certified for Category 3 hiking, the most challenging grade in the Soviet system. They were the bright young minds of the USSR, products of a system that prized strength, science, and collective endeavor. Their goal was Otorten, a peak in the northern Urals, a journey intended to be a testament to their skill and the spirit of their era. The group was a tapestry of youthful camaraderie and aspiration. Igor Dyatlov, the 23-year-old leader, was serious and authoritative, a natural planner. Zinaida Kolmogorova, bright-eyed and diligent, was the trip's chronicler. Ludmila Dubinina, known as Luda, was a spirited and resilient economics student. Alongside them were Rustam Slobodin, a witty and athletic engineer, Alexander Kolevatov, a quiet, methodical radio operator, Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, a geologist with a sharp intellect, Yuri Doroshenko, strong and dependable, Yuri Krivonischenko, a cheerful construction engineer, and Alexander Zolotarev, a seasoned 37-year-old hiking instructor who had joined the group last minute. The 10th member, Yuri Yudin, would turn back due to illness, a twist of fate that saved his life but burdened him with a lifetime of survivor's guilt. On January 23, 1959, the 9 began their final journey, boarding a train north from Sverdlovsk. Their mood was captured in a single, grainy black and white photograph, their faces young and full of anticipation, unaware they were posing for a portrait that would become an icon of one of the world's greatest mysteries. They carried with them the standard equipment of the time: woolen clothing, tarpaulin jackets and pants, skis, and a shared tent. Their technology was rudimentary: no satellite phones, no GPS, only maps, compasses, and their own collective wits against one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. The initial phase of the trek proceeded with textbook precision. They sent a telegram from the last inhabited settlement, viz. Hey, on January 31st, all is well, it read. Their planned route would take them up the Ospia River Valley, across the pass, and towards Mount O'Torton. The final diary entry, penned by one of the hikers on February 1st, noted nothing more alarming than the challenging terrain and the increasing cold. They made camp on the wooded slope of Katabatic, intending to cross the pass the following day. It was a routine decision, one made by countless hiking groups before them. That night, as they settled into their tent, the world outside was simply a cold, dark wilderness. Within hours, it would transform into an inexplicable nightmare. The planned return date of February 12 came and went without a word. This was not immediately a cause for alarm. Delays were common in such arduous expeditions. But by the 20th, with no contact, the families and the Institute mobilized a search party. The first teams, consisting of army and police, set out on February 21st. They were followed by student volunteers, including close friends of the missing hikers, who knew the routes and the group's habits. It was this second wave, led by Mikhail Sherevin, that on February 26 crested the ridge and saw the dark speck of the tent on the white expanse of Katabatic, its silence more terrifying than any distress signal. The discovery of the abandoned tent sent a shockwave through the search team. The slashes were not from the outside, but from within, made with knives found inside the tent. This single detail transformed the mystery. They had not been attacked by an external force, they had cut their own way out. The scene suggested a panic so profound that they did not even take the seconds required to untie the entrance flaps. They had fled, half-dressed, into a lethal environment, as if fleeing something they perceived to be inside the tent with them, or something so terrifyingly immediate outside that the tent offered no protection. The trail of footprints, a confused mix of 8 or 9 sets, told a fragmented story. Some were from felt boots, others from bare feet or socks. They led down the slope, towards the forest, about a mile away. The searchers followed this ghostly path, their own dread mounting with every step. The footprints were not the purposeful strides of people moving towards a known objective, but the scattered, disorganized impressions of a group in utter disarray, some running, some walking, all moving away from the only source of warmth and survival on that barren mountainside. At the tree lean, under the great cedar, they found the first grim evidence of a failed last stand. The bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko were discovered, barefoot and dressed only in their underwear. The bark of the cedar tree was scarred and broken up to a height of 5 meters, as if one of them had climbed frantically, searching for something, a signal, a vantage point, or an escape. The remnants of a small fire were nearby, and the scene suggested they had managed to light it, using twigs and branches broken from the lower part of the tree, a feeble attempt to hold the deadly cold at bay. The next 3 bodies were found between the cedar and the tent, as if they had perished in a desperate attempt to return. Rustem Slobodin, Igor Dyatlov, and Zinaida Kolmogorova were slightly better dressed than the first 2, but still critically under-equipped for the conditions. Their bodies were frozen in postures of movement, facing up the slope. There were no immediate signs of violent trauma on these 5, the official cause of death for all would be hypothermia. It seemed a straightforward, if bizarre, tragedy of panic and exposure. But the mystery was only half told. It took over 2 months for the spring thaw to relinquish the final 4 members of the party. In May, under a deep layer of snow in a ravine, searchers found Ludmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, and Alexander Zolotarev. The scene was profoundly different. These 4 were far better clothed, having apparently taken the time to don items from their deceased comrades. But their bodies told a story of catastrophic, internal violence that defied all explanation. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles had suffered a catastrophic skull fracture. Ludmila Dubinina and Alexander Zolotarev had massive, crushing injuries to their chests, multiple ribs shattered in a symmetrical, patterned fashion. The force required was compared by forensic experts to that of a high-speed car crash. Astonishingly, there was no corresponding external trauma, no bruising or lacerations on the skin covering these devastating internal wounds. It was as if they had been subjected to an immense, concussive pressure wave. To add another layer of macabre mystery, Ludmila was found missing her tongue, her lips, and part of her eyelids, injuries later determined by investigators to have been caused by post-mortem scavenging by small animals in the thawing conditions. The official investigation, led by prosecutor Lev Ivanov, was immediately hamstrung by the bizarre nature of the evidence and the political pressures of the time. The Soviet Union of 1959 was a closed society, and an unexplained tragedy involving some of its best and brightest was a potential embarrassment. Ivanov's team worked diligently, but they were operating with a limited forensic toolkit and within a system that prized closure over uncomfortable truths. The families of the deceased were given vague, often contradictory information, and the case was officially classified, its files stamped secret. The autopsy reports became the core of the mystery. Beyond the crushing internal injuries, other strange clues emerged. Pieces of clothing from the last 4 victims were found to be highly radioactive. Some of the hikers' personal cameras were recovered, but the film inside yielded only a handful of cryptic final photographs, blurry shots of the campsite being set up, and one infamous image, taken from the tent in the dark, that appears to show a strange, glowing orb in the distance, though experts have since debated it could be a flaw in the film or a light source from one of the hikers themselves. Faced with this contradictory evidence, the official inquest concluded in May 1959 that the group's death was caused by a compelling natural force. The case was closed, the files sealed. This vague, unsatisfying conclusion only served to fuel the fires of speculation. What natural force could cause such a specific set of injuries and provoke such a panicked flight? The lack of a clear answer from the authorities created a vacuum, one that would be filled with a proliferation of theories, each more elaborate than the last. One of the earliest and most persistent theories involved the indigenous Mansi people. Perhaps the hikers had trespassed on sacred land and been punished. But this was quickly dismissed by investigators. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints other than those of the hikers, and the Mansi were known to be a peaceful community. The nature of the injuries also bore no resemblance to any known weapon or tool. The Mansi theory was a classic red herring, a product of cultural misunderstanding that was officially discarded but has lingered in the public imagination. Another theory pointed to a catastrophic avalanche. It was suggested that the sound of an impending slide could have panicked the group, causing them to cut their way out of the tent. However, this was heavily contested by geologists. The slope on which they camped was too gentle for a major avalanche, and subsequent studies of the snow layers showed no evidence of such an event. Furthermore, an avalanche could not explain the crushing internal injuries to the 4 in the ravine, nor the lack of external trauma or suffocation. The avalanche theory, while logical on the surface, failed to align with the specific, brutal facts of the trauma. The Cold War context gave birth to more paranoid explanations. Were the hikers accidental witnesses to a secret military test? The presence of radioactive material on their clothes lent a chilling credence to this idea. Perhaps they had stumbled upon a test of a new weapon, an infrasound device or a pressure bomb, that caused both the panic and the injuries. The subsequent government secrecy and the hasty closure of the case fit neatly into this narrative of a cover-up. Yet, no definitive proof of such tests in the area has ever emerged from the open Soviet archives. The most sensational theories ventured into the realm of the paranormal. Ufologists seized upon the strange, orb-like light in one of the final photographs and the reports of mysterious orange spheres in the sky seen by other hikers in the region that winter. They postulated an extraterrestrial encounter. Others spoke of the Yeti, a violent, unknown creature from the snows. While these ideas captured the public's imagination, they remained firmly in the domain of speculation, lacking any physical evidence or credible witness testimony to move them into the realm of plausible investigation. A more recent and scientifically grounded theory involves a rare meteorological phenomenon known as a Katabatic wind. These are gravity-driven currents of dense, cold air that can flow down a mountain slope with hurricane-like force. A sudden, powerful Katabatic wind could have battered the tent, creating a deafening roar and causing the panicked flight. It could also, in theory, have created a wind slab avalanche, a small, localized, and very dense slide of snow that could have tumbled the four in the ravine, causing their internal injuries while leaving the others untouched. This theory elegantly explains both the panic and the trauma, but remains difficult to prove conclusively decades later. The behavior of the group itself has been meticulously analyzed. Why did they not simply put on their boots? Why did they not all stick together? Psychologists suggest that in a state of sheer, collective panic, rational thought disintegrates. The fight or flight response takes over, and the most logical actions become impossible. The fact that some were better dressed than others suggests that a degree of order was attempted in the chaos, perhaps by the more experienced members like Zolotarev, but it was too little, too late. The mystery was largely dormant for decades, a cold case in every sense of the word, until the fall of the Soviet Union. In the 1990s, case files were partially declassified, allowing journalists and independent researchers a first glimpse at the original evidence. While these files answered some small questions, they primarily served to highlight the inadequacies of the original investigation and the many inconsistencies that remained unresolved, reigniting global interest in the Dyatlov Pass Incident. In 2019, Russian authorities, bowing to persistent public pressure from the victims' families and a new generation of investigators, announced they were reopening the official investigation. This was not an admission of a prior cover-up, but an acknowledgement that modern forensic science might provide answers that were beyond the reach of 1950s technology. It was a hope that the long silence of the Urals might finally be broken. The new investigation focused heavily on the most plausible natural explanations. A team of experts from the Russian Academy of Sciences conducted sophisticated computer modeling of the weather and snow conditions on the night of February 1, 1959. Their conclusion, announced in 2020, pointed squarely at a slab avalanche as the most likely cause. They theorized that the hikers had cut a platform into the slope for their tent, inadvertently undermining a cohesive layer of snow above them. This modern avalanche theory posits that a block of snow, perhaps triggered by the cutting of the platform or by strong winds days later, slid down and struck the tent. The impact was not burial, but a violent, crushing blow. This, the scientists argued, could explain the chest trauma, a direct hit from a dense slab of snow. The panic was a natural response to the sudden, violent collapse of their shelter. The reason previous avalanche theories were dismissed, they suggested, was because investigators were looking for a traditional, powder snow avalanche that buries its victims, not this unique and localized slab event. The 2020 announcement was presented by Russian authorities as the definitive solution. Yet, for many experts and amateur sleuths, it felt like a forced conclusion. Renowned avalanche specialists from outside Russia publicly questioned the model, stating that the slope's angle and the snow conditions made such a severe, injury-causing slab avalanche highly improbable. The theory also struggled to explain why the four most severely injured hikers were found a significant distance from the tent, in the ravine, having apparently walked there after the initial event. Other modern theories have emerged, one of the most compelling being a hypothesis involving a paradoxical undressing on a mass scale. In the final stages of severe hypothermia, victims can experience a burning sensation, leading them to irrationally remove their clothing. Coupled with a phenomenon called terminal burrowing, where victims seek small, enclosed spaces, this could explain the state of undress and the location of the bodies in the ravine. However, this does not account for the massive physical trauma, which is far beyond anything associated with hypothermia. The radioactive clothing, a cornerstone of the military conspiracy theories, has also been re-evaluated. It was common in the Soviet era for certain types of camping equipment, particularly lantern mantles, to be treated with mildly radioactive thorium. It is plausible that the hikers had such equipment, and that the radiation was transferred to their clothes through handling, demystifying one of the case's most sinister clues. The true crime community remains deeply divided. Online forums are battlegrounds for competing theories, with each faction presenting its own interpretation of the evidence. The case has inspired countless books, documentaries, and even a major Hollywood film, each adding layers of interpretation and drama to the raw, skeletal facts recovered from the snow. The Dyatlov Pass has transcended its origins to become a modern myth, a Rorschach test onto which people project their own fears and beliefs about the wilderness, the government, and the unknown. The human element of the tragedy is often lost in the whirlwind of theories. These were not just characters in a mystery, but vibrant young people with families, dreams, and futures. Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor, lived until 2013, forever haunted by the question of what he might have done differently had he been there. The families of the victims have had to endure not only their grief but also decades of sensationalism and speculation surrounding the deaths of their loved ones. A memorial stands today near the Ural Polytechnic Institute, a solemn bronze sculpture of the 9 hikers on their final journey. It is a permanent reminder of the lives cut short. On the remote slope of Kholat Syakhl, a simple metal plaque has been erected, a stark monument in a vast and empty landscape. The mountain itself remains largely unchanged, silent and imposing, holding its secret as tightly as it did on that frigid night in 1959. In 2021, a final, symbolic gesture was made. Using DNA from a relative, the last unidentified body from the ravine, that of Alexander Zolotarev, was formally confirmed, bringing a small measure of closure to one family line. Yet, this scientific confirmation of identity did nothing to explain the circumstances of his death. It was a reminder that while we can now put names to the faces in the photographs with absolute certainty, the story of their final hours remains just as opaque. The official case was closed once again in 2020, with the Avalanche theory standing as the Russian state's final word. But the file was never truly sealed in the court of public opinion. The debate continues, with new analyses and papers published regularly. The Dyatlov Pass incident is no longer a single event but an ongoing investigation, a cold case that the world refuses to let freeze over. The legacy of the incident is a testament to the power of an unsolved mystery. It sits at the crossroads of known science and the terrifying possibility of the unknown. It challenges our belief that in the modern age, with all our technology and knowledge, every event can be neatly explained and categorized. The 9 hikers of Dyatlov Pass prove that some stories resist an ending. The true horror of Dyatlov Pass may not lie in a malevolent force, a government conspiracy, or a mythical beast, but in the unsettling idea that a group of skilled, rational people could be driven to such a desperate, fatal flight by a chain of mundane, natural events we still do not fully understand. It is the horror of a perfect storm of bad luck, poor decisions, and natural phenomena converging with a violence that seems almost purposeful. The mountain did not need a monster, it had the cold, the wind, and the snow. And so, The tent on the mountain of the dead remains a stark symbol of the line between the known world and the wilderness that lies just beyond our understanding. The 9 sets of footprints, leading away from sanctuary into the dark, ask a question that echoes through the decades. What would make you, secure in your shelter, tear it open with your own hands and run, half-dressed, into certain death? It is a question without a definitive answer, a silent scream frozen in time that continues to captivate, horrify, and haunt all who dare to listen. The mystery of the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains a chilling enigma. If this deep dive into the unknown has captivated you, become a part of our investigation team by subscribing to Shadowed Crimes and hitting the notification bell. Your perspective is crucial. Based on the evidence presented, which theory do you find most compelling, and what one piece of evidence keeps you up at night? Share your profile of the case in the comments below. Thank you all.